There's a reason Seneca became one of the wealthiest men in Rome while preaching about not caring about money. And it's not hypocrisy. It's a psychological advantage that most people completely misunderstand. The Stoics discovered that the people who care least about money, in a specific way, end up with the most, while the people who desperately chase it stay broke forever, trapped in a cycle they don't even see. This isn't about manifestation or positive thinking. This is about a dark mental framework that creates wealth almost as a side effect. And the reason it's dark is because once you see it, you can't unsee how backwards you've been doing everything. You've been taught to want money. The Stoics teach something completely different, and that difference is everything. Welcome to Stoic Valor, where we don't sell you comfortable lies about wealth and success. We show you what actually works, even when it contradicts everything you've been taught. If you're here looking for a get-rich-quick scheme, you won't find it. But if you're ready to understand the psychological framework that builds real, lasting wealth, the kind that compounds over decades, the kind that the truly wealthy use whether they know they're being stoic or not, then you're exactly where you need to be. Let's dive in. Picture Seneca in 1st century Rome. He's not just a philosopher, he's obscenely wealthy. We're talking Roman senator level wealth. Estates, vineyards, money-lending operations. By modern estimates, he'd be worth hundreds of millions, possibly billions. And he's writing essays about how money doesn't matter, how wealth is meaningless, how the wise man should be indifferent to fortune. His critics in Rome called him a hypocrite. How can you preach about not caring about money while being one of the richest men alive? But they missed the entire point. And you're probably missing it too. Here's what Seneca understood that changes everything about how you approach wealth. Money is what the Stoics called a preferred indifferent. Break that down. Indifferent means it has nothing to do with your virtue, your character, your actual worth as a person. You can be rich and virtuous or rich and corrupt. You can be poor and virtuous or poor and corrupt. The money itself is neutral. It doesn't make you good or bad. But preferred means, all else being equal, it's better to have it than not. It gives you options. Freedom, the ability to help others, the ability to pursue philosophy without worrying about survival. So the Stoic doesn't pretend money doesn't matter. He just refuses to make his happiness dependent on having it. And here's where it gets psychologically interesting. The moment you stop making your happiness contingent on wealth, you make better decisions about wealth. Think about the last financial decision you made from a place of desperation or fear. Maybe you stayed in a job you hate because you're terrified of losing income. Maybe you didn't take a calculated risk because you couldn't handle the possibility of loss. Maybe you made a desperate investment because you need money now. Every single one of those decisions probably hurt you financially. Why? Because decisions made from fear and attachment are almost always bad decisions. They're reactive, short-term, emotionally driven, and they keep you exactly where you are. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, richest and most powerful man on earth at the time, wrote something in his private journal that most people read and completely miss the significance of. He wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." He wasn't saying money doesn't matter. He was saying that once you realize your happiness doesn't require wealth, you stop making terrible decisions out of desperation. And paradoxically, you start building wealth more effectively, because you're thinking long-term. You're making decisions from clarity, not fear. You can take calculated risks because you're not terrified of loss. You can be patient because you don't need results immediately to feel okay. You know that feeling when you check your bank account and your entire mood shifts based on the number? That's enslavement. You've made your internal state dependent on an external thing you only partly control, and that dependence makes you weak. It makes you accept situations you shouldn't accept. It makes you chase short-term gains at the expense of long-term wealth. The Stoics would look at that and tell you that you're not trying to build wealth. You're trying to fix an internal problem with an external solution, and it will never work. The hole inside you that you're trying to fill with money, it doesn't get filled by money. It gets filled by philosophy, by virtue, by internal work. But here's what most people get catastrophically wrong when they hear this. They think Stoicism is telling you not to pursue wealth. It's not. It's telling you to pursue it from a different psychological position. Seneca didn't become wealthy by accident. He was strategic, disciplined, patient, and willing to take calculated risks. But he wasn't desperate. He wasn't attached to outcomes. He wasn't making his okayness dependent on every venture succeeding. And that psychological freedom gave him an enormous advantage over everyone who was desperately, fearfully chasing money. He could think clearly. He could wait. He could make moves that others were too scared to make because they couldn't handle the possibility of temporary loss. Ryan Holiday writes about this in Ego is the Enemy when he talks about how attachment to outcomes makes you rigid and reactive, while detachment from outcomes while maintaining commitment to process makes you flexible and strategic. Same principle the Stoics taught 2,000 years ago. The people who build lasting wealth aren't the ones desperately chasing money. They're the ones who develop valuable skills, provide genuine value, think long-term, and let wealth accumulate as a natural consequence. The chase creates poverty. The detached discipline creates wealth. It's completely backwards from what you've been taught. Epictetus, who went from slave to one of the most influential philosophers in history, understood this at a level most wealthy people never reach. He had nothing, literally nothing. He was property, and he was freer and more content than the wealthy Romans he eventually taught. Why? Because he understood that freedom isn't about external wealth, it's about internal independence. And here's the dark secret. Once you achieve that internal independence, once you genuinely don't need wealth to feel okay, you're in the perfect psychological position to build it. Because you're not making desperate decisions. You're not staying in situations out of fear. You're not chasing shiny objects. You're calmly, patiently, strategically building value. And value always, eventually, converts to wealth. Think about every wealthy person you know who seems miserable. They have money, but they're terrified of losing it. They have success, but they can't enjoy it. They have options, but they're paralyzed by them. Why? Because they built wealth without building the internal philosophy to handle it. They're enslaved to what they have. The Stoics built the philosophy first, and then the wealth that came didn't enslave them because they already knew it was just a preferred indifferent. Nice to have, useful, but not required for happiness. That's the framework. That's the secret. And it sounds simple, but applying it requires completely rewiring how you think about money, success, and self-worth. Hold that thought, because what I'm about to share changes everything. The way you've been taught to pursue wealth is creating the exact psychology that keeps you broke. And the Stoic alternative isn't just philosophically sound. It's financially superior in every measurable way. But knowing this changes nothing if you don't know how to apply it. And the way you apply it is not what you think. So how do you actually apply this? How do you build wealth from a Stoic framework when everything in modern culture is screaming at you to desperately chase money? Let me show you the exact practices that the Stoics used, translated into modern financial terms. Because there's a massive difference between understanding this intellectually and actually living it. And that difference is the difference between staying broke and building real wealth. The first practice is what Seneca called voluntary discomfort. Once a month, he would live as if he'd lost everything. He'd sleep on the floor, eat the cheapest food, wear simple clothes, live like he was broke. Why? Because he was training himself to not fear poverty. And here's what happens psychologically. When you're not afraid of being broke, you can take calculated risks. You can leave the job that's underpaying you. You can start the business. You can make the investment. You can negotiate harder. Because the worst case scenario, poverty, you've already proven to yourself you can handle. That's not theory. That's a massive psychological advantage that translates directly to financial outcomes. Here's how you apply this today. 1 weekend a month, live on $20. Not as punishment, as training. Eat rice and beans. Don't spend on entertainment. Experience what poverty actually feels like in a controlled way. And here's what you'll discover. It's not nearly as scary as the story you've built in your head. You'll survive. You'll be fine. And that realization will make you bolder in every financial decision you make for the next 30 days. Most people stay in situations that keep them poor because they're terrified of a poverty they've never actually experienced. They're enslaved by a phantom. The Stoic faces the phantom and realizes it's not that bad. And that knowledge is worth more than most investments. The second practice is the dichotomy of control applied to finances. Epictetus taught that you need to separate what you control from what you don't. In wealth building, you don't control outcomes. You don't control the market. You don't control the economy. You don't control whether your business succeeds. But you control your effort, your discipline, your learning, your skills. Most people focus 90% of their energy on outcomes they don't control and 10% on process they do control. The Stoic inverts that: 100% focus on what you control, 0 emotional investment in what you don't. Here's the practice. Every morning, before you start working, write down 3 things: what you control today, what you don't control today, and where you're going to focus your energy. Let's say you're building a business. You don't control if customers buy. You control how many people you reach out to, how good your offer is, how you respond to rejection. You don't control if investors say yes. You control how prepared you are, how clear your pitch is, how many investors you talk to. The moment you stop bleeding energy into outcomes and pour it all into process, your results improve. Not because you're manifesting, because you're focusing your finite energy on the variables you actually influence. But there's a problem most people hit immediately. They confuse detachment from outcomes with not caring about outcomes. Huge difference. You care deeply. You're putting in maximum effort, but you're not making your emotional state contingent on results. You give everything to the process and accept whatever outcome emerges. That's the Stoic position. And it's psychologically superior for wealth building because it allows you to be consistent. Most people work hard when things are going well and collapse when things go badly. The Stoic maintains the same disciplined effort regardless of outcomes. And guess what compounds over time? Consistent effort, not emotional roller coasters. The third practice is Seneca's evening review applied to finances. Every night before sleep, Seneca would review his day. What did I do well? Where did I fall short of my principles? How can I improve tomorrow? Here's the financial version. What financial decision did I make today? Was it from clarity or fear? from long-term thinking or short-term reaction. What can I do better tomorrow? You're literally debugging your financial decision-making daily. And the people who do this consistently get better at money decisions at a rate that's almost unfair compared to people who never reflect. Let me give you a concrete example. You're scrolling your phone and you see an ad for something you don't need. The impulse to buy hits. Most people either buy it thoughtlessly or resist it through willpower, which depletes. The Stoic does something different. He pauses. He asks, is this aligned with my principles? Will this bring me closer to my goals or further? Is this fear-driven, pleasure-seeking, or and then he decides, not from impulse, from principle, and that night, he reviews the decision. If he bought it, was it worth it? If he didn't, did he feel deprived or strong? He's building a feedback loop that makes him better at every subsequent decision. James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits when he discusses how small improvements compound. 1% better at financial decisions every day, compounded over a year, makes you 37 times better. But most people never improve because they never review. They make the same impulsive, fear-driven, short-term decisions over and over, wondering why they stay broke. The Stoic builds a system of constant improvement, and systems beat goals every time. Not because goals are bad, but because systems create identity change. You stop being someone who's trying to get rich and become someone who makes excellent financial decisions. That identity shift changes everything, Tao. What I'm about to share is counterintuitive but essential. The fourth practice is negative visualization applied to wealth. Before bed, imagine you've lost everything. Your job, your savings, your income. Not to create anxiety, but to prepare. How would you rebuild? What skills do you have? What value could you provide? The Stoics did this obsessively, and here's why it's psychologically brilliant for wealth building. 1. It makes you appreciate what you have right now, which reduces the desperate chasing that destroys wealth. 2. It forces you to identify what you actually control. Your skills, your knowledge, your ability to create value, which are the real sources of wealth. 3. It removes the fear of loss, which makes you more strategic and less reactive. Most people avoid thinking about financial catastrophe, so when it comes, and it always comes eventually, they're devastated. They panic. They make terrible decisions that make it worse. The Stoic has mentally rehearsed catastrophe hundreds of times, so when it actually happens, he's calm. He knows what to do. He's already planned the rebuild. That preparation is a massive advantage. Mark Manson writes about this in The Subtle Art when he talks about how accepting the worst-case scenario paradoxically makes you more capable of achieving best-case outcomes. Because you're not paralyzed by fear. You're liberated by acceptance, if this is hitting different. If you're starting to see how completely backwards you've been approaching money, then subscribe to Stoic Valor, because we're not building an audience here. We're building a community of people who are done making desperate, fear-driven decisions and ready to build wealth from genuine strength and discipline. We're just getting started. And what we're about to explore will show you that this isn't just theory. This is how real people, in the real world, have built real wealth using these exact principles. But does this actually work in the real world, when you're actually broke and trying to build something? Let me show you. But does this actually work when you're starting from broke? When you've got bills, debt, obligations, and philosophy sounds nice, but feels irrelevant to your immediate financial crisis. Let me show you what happens when people actually apply these Stoic principles to real financial situations. Because theory is beautiful, but wealth is built in reality. Not in philosophy books. There was a man I'll call David F. Good job, 6-figure income, and completely broke. How lifestyle inflation, every raise, bigger apartment, every bonus, nicer car. He was making more than 90% of people and living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from financial catastrophe. He came across Seneca during a particularly anxious period, specifically Seneca's Letters on Wealth. One line stopped him cold. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." David realized he'd been using money to fill an internal void. No amount would ever be enough because the problem wasn't external. It was internal. So he did something radical. He practiced voluntary poverty, moved to a smaller place, sold the car, cut expenses to the bone, not as punishment, as an experiment, to prove to himself he didn't need any of it to be okay. Here's what happened. First month was hard, his ego screamed. But by month 3, something shifted. He realized he was happier with less. The anxiety about money disappeared because he'd proven to himself he could live on very little. And paradoxically, his income started growing. Why? Because he was no longer making career decisions from fear of losing his lifestyle. He negotiated harder. He took a calculated risk on a startup. He started a side business, none of which he would have done when he was desperately clinging to his expensive lifestyle. 2 years later, he's genuinely wealthy. Not just high income, actual wealth. Savings, investments, passive income, but more importantly, he's wealthy in the Stoic sense. His happiness isn't contingent on any of it. He knows he could lose it all tomorrow and be fine. That's freedom. That's the Stoic secret. You build wealth after you stop needing it, because that's when you make the best decisions. Contrast this with another case. A man who made millions and lost it all. Why? Because he never developed the internal philosophy. Every decision was fear-driven, desperate to maintain status, terrified of loss, made increasingly risky bets, over-leveraged, and when the market turned, everything collapsed. Same intelligence, same opportunities, different philosophy, completely different outcome. Ryan Holiday documents this pattern extensively in Ego is the Enemy. The people who build lasting wealth almost always have some version of Stoic philosophy, whether they call it that or not. They're detached from outcomes, focused on process, patient, willing to delay gratification, not desperate. And the people who make and lose money repeatedly, they're almost always attached, desperate, short-term focused, unable to handle loss. Same opportunities, different psychology, different results. The philosophy isn't decoration. It's the foundation that determines whether wealth builds or collapses. Let me give you another case. A woman, mid-20s, deep in debt, student loans, credit cards, medical bills. She was working 2 jobs and barely surviving, drowning in interest, feeling hopeless. She found Epictetus, specifically his teaching on the dichotomy of control, and she had a realization. She couldn't control the debt. It existed, but she could control her response. She stopped spending emotional energy hating the debt, fearing it, being paralyzed by it. She created a plan. Radical frugality. Every extra dollar to debt. Side hustle focused on high-value skills. And here's the key. She detached from the timeline. She didn't need it gone in a year. She was committed to the process for however long it took. 3 years later, debt-free. But she told me the transformation wasn't financial. It was psychological, she said. I'm not afraid of money anymore. I used to avoid looking at my account because it made me anxious. Now I look at it neutrally. It's just information. That shift changed everything. She went from financial chaos to financial clarity, not because she made more money, though she did, but because she changed her relationship with money. She stopped making her okayness contingent on her bank balance. And paradoxically, her bank balance improved dramatically. That's the pattern. Over and over, the internal shift creates the external change. Now let's talk about someone who applied the evening review to business. Entrepreneur, started a company, and for the first 2 years, it was chaos. Constant pivots, chasing trends, reacting to competitors, no clear strategy. He was working 18-hour days and going nowhere. Then he implemented Seneca's daily review for business. Every evening, 3 questions. What decisions did I make today? Were they strategic or reactive? What can I do better tomorrow? Within weeks, patterns emerged. He realized he was making decisions from fear of missing out, not from strategic thinking. He was chasing every opportunity instead of focusing on core value. He simplified, focused on one thing, said no to everything else. And the business transformed. Not because he worked harder. He actually worked less, but he worked on the right things. He stopped being reactive and became strategic. Revenue tripled in the next year. But he said something profound. The money is great, but what's better is I'm not controlled by it anymore. I built a business I could walk away from tomorrow and be fine. That freedom is worth more than the revenue. That's Stoic wealth. Building something valuable while remaining internally independent from it. Here's one more case because this shows the full picture. A man who was comfortable, good income, savings, stable life, but no real wealth. He was playing it safe, terrified of risk, missing opportunities because he couldn't handle the possibility of loss. He learned about negative visualization from Marcus Aurelius, started practicing it every night, imagining losing everything, and something unexpected happened. Instead of making him more fearful, it made him braver, because he'd proven to himself, mentally, that he could rebuild from zero. That knowledge made him take calculated risks he'd been avoiding. He started a business, invested in real estate, negotiated a better position, all things he'd been too scared to do before. Not because he became reckless, because he became genuinely confident. He knew that even if everything failed, he had the skills, knowledge, and character to rebuild. 5 years later, genuinely wealthy, but he traces it all back to that practice, facing his fear of loss repeatedly until it lost its power over him. That's the Stoic advantage. Most people are controlled by fears they've never examined. The Stoic examines every fear until it becomes powerless, and that liberation translates directly to better financial decisions, which compound into wealth. These aren't special people. They're people who understood that wealth is built on psychology, not just on tactics. That your relationship with money determines your results more than your knowledge about money. That internal independence creates external abundance. The same principles available to you right now. So the question becomes, are you ready to change your psychology? Or are you going to keep using the same broke mindset and expecting different results? Because everything changes after this. Remember what we started with? Seneca being obscenely wealthy while preaching about not caring about money. Now you understand it's not hypocrisy. It's advantage. The psychological freedom that comes from not needing wealth is exactly what allows you to build it most effectively. The desperate chase creates poverty. The detached discipline creates wealth. And most people spend their entire lives doing it backwards, wondering why they stay broke no matter how hard they work. Because they're working hard with the wrong psychology, and psychology determines outcomes more than effort. Let me bring this full circle. What the Stoics discovered about wealth isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a complete restructuring of how you relate to money, success, and self-worth. Most people make their happiness contingent on their bank balance. So they make desperate decisions. They chase shiny objects. They can't delay gratification. They stay in bad situations out of fear. They can't take calculated risks. And they wonder why wealth never accumulates. The Stoic does the internal work first, builds the philosophy, develops the discipline, creates internal independence, and then pursues wealth from that position of strength, not because he needs it to feel okay, because it's useful, because it creates options, because it's a preferred indifferent. But here's the part that most people resist. This requires genuine transformation. You can't fake internal independence. You can't pretend you don't care about money while desperately checking your balance 10 times a day. You can't perform stoic detachment while making every decision from fear and attachment. The work is internal, it's daily, it's uncomfortable. Most people would rather stay broke with their current psychology than do the work of changing it, and that's fine. But then don't wonder why nothing changes. Don't blame the economy, your circumstances, your opportunities. The obstacle isn't external, it's between your ears. So here's what you need to ask yourself right now. What is your actual relationship with money? Be brutally honest. Does your mood shift based on your bank balance? Do you make decisions from fear of loss or from strategic thinking? Are you desperate or disciplined? Are you chasing or building? Are you short-term reactive or long-term strategic? Because your answers to these questions predict your financial future more accurately than any other factor. Skills matter. Knowledge matters. Opportunities matter. But psychology determines whether you build wealth or sabotage it. And most people are sabotaging themselves daily with broke psychology. Let me paint two futures for you. Future 1. You watch this video, feel inspired, maybe even agree intellectually, and then you go back to the same relationship with money. The same desperate checking of accounts, the same fear-driven decisions, the same short-term thinking, the same inability to delay gratification, and 6 months from now, you're in the exact same financial position, maybe worse. Because you're older, you've spent more time, and you're no closer to wealth. You'll watch another video, read another book, look for another shortcut, never realizing that the shortcut is doing the internal work you keep avoiding. Future 2. You watch this video and you actually do something different. Tonight, you practice negative visualization. You imagine losing everything and you plan how you'd rebuild. And you realize you'd be okay. Tomorrow, you practice the dichotomy of control. You separate what you control, your effort, your learning, your discipline, from what you don't. Outcomes, markets, other people. And you focus 100% of your energy on what you actually control. You implement the evening review. Every night, you examine your financial decisions. Were they fear-based or principle-based? And you get better, 1% at a time. And 6 months from now, you're different. Not necessarily richer yet, though you might be. But your psychology is transformed. You're making better decisions. You're not desperate. You're not reactive. You're strategic. You're patient. You can delay gratification. You can take calculated risks. You're not enslaved by fear of loss. And that transformation, that psychological shift, that's what creates wealth. Not immediately, but inevitably, because you're no longer sabotaging yourself. You're finally working with the right psychology. And the right psychology with consistent effort always, eventually, produces wealth. Here's the challenge I'm giving you right now. Before you close this video, do one thing. Practice voluntary discomfort. For the next 7 days, cut one expense you think you need, not because you're broke. As training, prove to yourself you don't need it. It could be eating out, entertainment subscriptions, expensive coffee, whatever. The specific thing doesn't matter. What matters is proving to yourself that you can be okay without it, that you're not controlled by your desires, that you can choose discomfort, because that proof, that evidence to yourself that you're not enslaved by comfort, that's worth more than most investments you'll make. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in history, wrote something that most people read and miss the depth of. He said, "No person has the power to have everything they want, but it is in their power not to want what they don't have, and to cheerfully put to good use what they do have." Read that again. You can't control whether you get rich, but you can control whether you need to be rich to be okay. And the paradox is, the moment you don't need it, you're in the perfect position to build it, because you're making decisions from clarity, not desperation, from strategy, not fear, from long-term thinking, not short-term relief. If you want to continue this journey, if you're ready to build wealth from genuine psychological strength instead of desperate chasing, subscribe to Stoic Valor. We're not here for people who want quick fixes and magic formulas. We're here for the few who understand that real wealth requires real internal work. Every video we create is designed to build that internal strength, not to make you feel good, but to make you genuinely strong. That's the difference. That's what we're building here. Drop a comment telling me, what's one financial decision you've been making from fear instead of strategy? What's one area where your desperate psychology is keeping you broke? Your honesty might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to finally change their own psychology. And if you know someone who's stuck financially, who's working hard but going nowhere, who's desperate and doesn't know why nothing's working, send them this video, not to sell them a dream, but to show them the internal work that creates external wealth. Marcus Aurelius, the richest man alive during his time, wrote this in his journal, never intending anyone to read it. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That's it. That's the entire secret. You can't control the economy. You can't control opportunities. You can't fully control outcomes, but you can control your psychology, your discipline, your principles, your response. And when you build that internal strength, when you develop that Stoic psychology, wealth becomes almost inevitable. Not because you're manifesting it, because you're finally making decisions with the psychology that builds it instead of the psychology that sabotages it. You're standing at a choice point right now. One path is comfortable. Keep the same psychology. Keep the desperate relationship with money. Keep making fear-driven decisions. Keep hoping something external changes while you stay the same. That path leads exactly where you are now. The other path is uncomfortable. Face your relationship with money. Do the internal work. Practice voluntary discomfort. Develop genuine independence from outcomes. Build Stoic discipline. That path is harder, but it's the only path that leads to real wealth. The Stoics walked it 2,000 years ago. They proved it works. The question is, are you willing to walk it now? See you in the next one.